Welcome, peeps! This is the Religious Nut and Hellbound Center podcast. I am your co-host, Chris Cheshire, the Hellbound Center.
And I'm the Religious Nut, Brother James, and I like peeps. Peeps are really, really young.
Please don't you close this club. I got nowhere to go.
Ew, gross.
Peeps are amazing.
Oh, I'll take the chocolate bunny.
Marshmallows with sprinkles.
Ugh.
Yes,
it's dry and...
You know, your face is dry, but...
Yeah, but it's still beautiful.
Oh yeah, sure. Anyway. So how have you been?
I'm okay. I had a major accomplishment out of my way in getting my license. Week and a half ago, it was 2 weeks ago now, I passed the National Counselor exam.
Nice.
Congrats. Thank you. It feels really good. I was studying my butt off for a long time for it, and I have a... Yeah, go ahead.
So psychology, you have to study your own butt?
Oh, yes. This is not about the brain, it's about the butt.
Oh, okay. Well, let's not go further than that.
We won't tell you it's about the brain. This is a trade secret.
Oh, okay.
I'm probably going to get excommunicated now.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, how are you doing?
Boring life. No. Just nothing amazing happening right now. I'm just still getting ready for seminary in the fall.
Cool.
Doing stuff with my church, kind of networking the Anglican churches in the Middle Tennessee area.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about kafifi.
Oh, yes. Kafifi. What is kafifi?
Kafifi is kafifi.
People are saying that it's coffee. No, that's way too boring.
It is kind
I don't think Trump even drinks coffee. Trump doesn't drink alcohol, which is probably his biggest problem right now. But,
probably. I heard a rumor he snorts cocaine.
Maybe that's what kafifi is.
No, that's what it is.
It helps him when he has the negative press. I showed you that video on how to make kafifi.
That was amazing.
And yes, I need to try that recipe out now.
Let me know how it goes.
A tortilla inside a coffee cup, I mean, it's just amazing. It's more than just that, but it involves a tortilla
and it almost
in a
looks
coffee
like
cup.
Cookies and cream smoothie and...
Except it's kafifi.
See.
Kafifi smoothie. Anyway, yes. If you don't know what kafifi is by now, then I'm sorry. There's no hope for you. I actually, the morning it happened, which was, yesterday? We're recording this Thursday night. The morning it happened, I sent a text message to, just about everybody I knew about kafifi, and, almost half of them had no idea what I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, but no, we are not talking about kafifi today. What are we talking about today, Kingy?
We are talking about God.
Who's bigger than the boogeyman?
Well, is he, though? Is he? How do you know?
Because the boogeyman is the size of a booger, and hence boogeyman. I
have met the boogeyman, and he is so much bigger than that.
Oh, okay, never mind then. I don't know. Maybe.
I mean, it just depends on if you're going to be able to count VeggieTales as evidence. I don't think so.
Well, it depends on what tradition you lie in. Anyway, this is getting way too serious to be... Yeah.
Okay, we are going to be getting into the most common arguments for God's existence over the next few episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to ask Brother James to kind of introduce some of the concepts of the arguments and what he thinks about them, or strengths or weaknesses or anything like that in general before we get into our first one.
Yeah, well, those of you who are familiar with William Lane Craig, those who are not familiar with William Lane Craig is an apologist for the Christian faith. He does a sort of mere Christianity approach, not dissimilar from C.S. Lewis. And he comes from the sort of evidentialist line of apologetics, as opposed to someone like Alvin Plantinga, who tends to be more presuppositionalist. But as to kind of simplify it, it's with evidentialist apologetics, it is what it sounds like. You sort of can think that you can prove, not beyond all doubt, but prove to a certain extent the idea of God existing. And he largely deals with the existence of God and then allows other people to work from there for Christianity itself. But he has 5 main arguments that he gives for evidences for God. The first one is the Kalam Cosmological Argument. It's a syllogism. It goes, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And then he works out from that on why he believes that that cause would be God. The next one will be the teleological argument. That one is looking at the conditions that are necessary for life to even possibly begin in this universe. And it's such a minuscule chance, he would argue, that it demands that it cannot be done accidentally. It has to be done purposefully. So he would say that God would be the cause of that. The third one is the moral argument, saying the moral argument gets confused a lot of times. People think that what is being said is, if you're not a Christian or if you don't believe in God, you're not moral. That's not the argument. The argument is the idea that there is a standard of morality, and that standard of morality has to have someone who makes it. Someone had to decide exactly how big an inch is. Someone has to decide how long a second is. Likewise, with morality, the idea is someone has to decide what is good and what is bad. And if there is an objective morality, then it can't be made by humans, because then it could be changed, because humans don't have an inherent authority over the others. But the idea is, if it is objective, then it seems the only person who would be able to do so is God. The fourth one is the ontological argument. That one, that's going to be a really fun episode to do.
Oh, Lord.
Yes, but it's the idea. The idea is this: there are 3 options. There are only 2 options, but there are 3 quote possible options for God's existence. Either God necessarily exists, God contingently exists, or it is impossible for God to exist. And what happens is the ontological argument rules out the middle one, having God as a contingent being. So it demands that either it is impossible for God to exist or God necessarily exists. And then the 5th one is that God can be immediately experienced in a personal way, and that's his kind of door that he opens for Christianity. So yeah, anything you want to add to that?
Nope. Except I was wondering, what do you see as these arguments' applicability, or what are the best appropriate ways to use these arguments in your opinion?
For me, during my sort of agnostic-y time in my life, they helped kind of intellectually shore me, because I could not argue against them intellectually to a satisfactory degree. Therefore, while my emotions did not want to believe in God, my intellect sort of demanded that I do, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with like the Kalam and the teleological, well, the first 3 definitely. It took me a while to wrap my head around the 4th one, the ontological argument, but once I did that, I realized all 4 of them are, I would say, all 4 of those are equally strong. And the 5th one, I think, is sort of, it's odd. We'll get to that one when we get to that episode.
Okay.
Whoops.
And it's interesting you talked about your experience with the arguments. I kind of had the reverse experience with them. I was first introduced to them in my junior year of college, in my systematic theology class at the University of Oklahoma City here. And we did not spend much time discussing them or unpacking them. We briefly touched on them for like about half of one class period and then just moved on. And even as a firm believer who is convinced of God and Jesus and Christianity, I had all kinds of problems with them. And life went on and it was really busy, so I just kind of kept it in the background. I was like, well, when I have more time or energy or desire later on, I'll come back to them. And actually, they came up again briefly in one of my philosophy and ethics classes, but again, didn't spend too much, same teacher, we didn't spend too much time on them. So it was In 2012, when I was starting to really question and allow myself to doubt a lot of the basic fabric of God, I went on a mad search to look for anything for or against and just try to figure it out and sort my way through it. And so I spent a lot of time with these philosophical arguments, watching debates from different people on both sides, reading up on the internet, just thinking about them and talking them through. And honestly, I found them all not totally. I'm not going to go to the extreme of some critics and say that they're completely worthless, but that at least for me as a skeptic, and even as one who used to be a believer, I don't feel that they completely accomplish what they were hoping to in terms of giving me good reason to believe.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, I wouldn't call it exactly a weakness, unless you are trying to have these arguments do more than what I think they were intended for.
What would you say that is then?
As far as what they're intended for?
Yeah.
The intent is, as I said earlier, it's more of a sort of... It's meant for the intellectual part.
Mm-hmm.
In light of these arguments, I think it would be hard to say that theism is irrational.
Oh, okay. Well,
You know?
this is getting a little ahead with my responses, but my arguments is not going to be that theism is irrational or that these arguments are definitely irrational.
Yeah, but some people would say that, is what I'm saying.
I would say intellectually, I do find them wanting in terms of demonstrating that God's existence is more probable than not. In terms of a skeptic, I think. I was listening to. The Teaching Company's Great Courses lecture series on philosophy of religion, and he spent some time going through the different arguments for and against God's existence, and when he was on the cosmological argument, it was pretty much with each argument, especially the ontological one, he said that in his conclusion, in his experience as a believer, and going through a period in his life when he's had some more skepticism, he has found them to be more helpful devotionally rather than to convince him God exists. As in, it's reinforced faith when he's already had it, but it hasn't really been the make or break for why he believed intellectually.
Yeah, I can understand that. I don't think they should be a make or break, to be honest.
Okay.
For me, they are primarily for two sets of people. For me, as a Christian who wants to intellectually shore myself during times that are dark in life.
Okay.
And it's also for... I don't want to be offensive in this. It is for agnostics, or I guess open atheists, although open atheists as well. Open agnostics and open atheists who, as far as I see it, genuinely willing to sort of approach this topic and be willing to kind of like be open to the idea of the existence of God. Right. Because I do come across a lot of atheists and agnostics, well, specifically atheists, who their arguments, their reason for not believing God seems to be, I hate God, therefore he doesn't exist.
Oh,
if that makes sense, you know? It's just sort of just, I hate God, therefore I don't want to believe in him.
See, that's why you can't paint anyone with a broad brushstroke. Just like when people stereotype Christians, you can't stereotype atheists. Every single one of us has a different story.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of some similarities with some of us, but I mean, yeah, for me, if there's anything about me, I do things very thoroughly. And yes, and we can do some episodes on this later. I have some real problems with some ways of interpreting God, or some Christian ways of looking at God, some ways that people believe in God that I would find to be distasteful, and that even if such a God existed, it would be hard for me to commit my life to that being. But there are, I think I've touched on this a little bit in a former episode, there would be some forms of God that could exist that I would not have a problem, in theory, with either their ability to exist or even further, my ability to necessarily think that they might be a good being that I could have a relationship with, in theory. And for me, ultimately, what caused me to make that last step to say I think the best thing to describe me as an atheist is after a while I just could not honestly say that I was convinced anymore. There was emotional components to it, but it was also a deeply intellectual process. It was a spiritual process. It touched all parts of me, and I think at the end of the day it was just I don't think I have good enough reason to say that I can believe it or say that it's more likely than unlikely. Definitely not closed-minded to being convinced if I find some sort of compelling evidence or experience or what have you that would lead me there. And honestly, I still toy around with the idea a lot of times. I think it's so funny, but a lot of people who are atheists think about God more often than some people who are religious.
That's unfortunate, and I wouldn't be surprised. There's no way to obviously kind of prove that.
Right. No,
there's definitely truth to that with some people, definitely.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to make a blanket statement by any means.
Yeah.
Okay.
What was I say? We tend to sort of go on automatic with our beliefs, and so we don't actually kind of think through them. Mm-hmm. So when things that are very big on our lives happen, that tends to make us sort of rethink our beliefs, and if they don't seem to fit with what's happening, then we tend to change them,
That's a fair observation.
Mm.
Okay, let's read through this argument one more time, and then we can each respond to it.
Well, we didn't read through it yet, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, you just basically introduced it. That's right.
Yeah, I just introduced it.
Okay, so do you want to read through it for us?
Yes. All right. You want me to just read it straight?
Yes.
All right. This is according to... I cannot say the name that Kingy put for this session. That's a very naughty word, Kingy. Shame on you.
I love naughty names.
Yes. I'll do it in an announcer voice, I suppose. Ready?
Ready.
Craig states the Kalam Cosmological Argument as a brief syllogism, most commonly rendered as follows. 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. Therefore, 3. The universe has a cause. From the conclusion of the initial syllogism, he appends a further premise and conclusion based upon ontological analysis of the properties of the cause. 1. The universe has a cause. 2. If the universe has a cause, then an uncaused personal creator of the universe exists, who sans the universe is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and enormously powerful. Therefore, 3. An uncaused personal creator of the universe exists, who sans the universe is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and enormously powerful. How'd I do?
Oh, that was beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
You should do more recordings like that. You could be the next personal assistant after Siri and Alexa.
Who?
Oh, have you not heard of Alexa?
Oh, Siri and Alexa.
Yeah.
I thought you said Siri and Alexa. I was like, what?
Oh, that's weird.
Siri and Alexa. Let's not get into that because we will make horrible jokes.
Oh, Lord. Oh, my gosh. Okay. So I'll start with some of my thoughts on this argument. I'll start with what I think some of the argument's strengths are, and then I'll also give some problems that I observe.
Okay.
First of all, I want to say that I find out of all of the arguments for God's existence, personally, I find this one to be the most compelling.
Okay.
I was actually reading on a website a while back that this one seems to have spawned a whole lot more dialogue than many of the others have. I think that this one is really dealing with a lot of not just fundamental properties of the universe or trying to answer the big question, why in the first place? Why is there stuff? Why are we here? But in stating something so succinctly, whether people are building on it or criticizing it. In just this last week, as I was preparing for this episode and reading through some stuff again, there's been an enormous dialogue that has emerged from this argument alone on all sides of the issue. I, for one, have found reading through a lot of that and thinking through a lot of it for myself very intriguing. So that's one thing that I like about it. So I think it has a lot of power to it. It's trying to get at one of the major questions that everybody asks at one point in their life about existing. Secondly, I am not a professional philosopher. I spend a lot of time thinking about big stuff. I don't know if that counts as me being a philosopher or not. I tend to prefer certain forms of philosophy that don't rely so much on linear, logical, mathematical sort of statements like these. This is more of a personal preference of mine, but I tend to find these types of things a little bit more simplistic and wanting for me, and I would rather use other forms of having discussions about things than these. Therefore, sometimes I can look at one and think, oh, that's fallacious, and somebody else is saying, who knows their shit a lot more than I do, no, that's pretty logically sound because of this, this, and this, and that helps me clarify my objection to it differently. So I think I've heard a lot of people who know philosophy describe this argument as very logically sound. So in terms of that, there you go. They did their job. And maybe you and I are coming at this differently. I'll have to hear more from you later, but I think some people who...
This is going to be the weaknesses of the argument now?
No, almost there. I'm finishing up the strength part. Okay. I think that there's a lot of people in philosophy, in the sciences, who are in love with math. And... They find math to be incredibly beautiful. They describe the universe as being best expressed in the language of math, and they love perfect equations. They love being able to prove stuff. They love the idea of perfection existing. And I'm an artist, I think, at my most default. I kind of have a scientist inside of me. I've got different parts of me, but at my core, I think I'm much more, as I would say, just more of a freestyle artist, and I find beauty in flaws. I find beauty in ruptures. I don't really look at things mathematically at all, so I think me coming to arguments like this, before I even get into the objections, I think I'm less able to comment on exactly what about this people love so well, because I have a hard time comprehending it, if you will.
Okay.
So, saying all that, now I'm going to get into some of my objections to the argument. I'd like to... Now, there are really two parts to this argument. We have the first segment where it doesn't even invoke God. It says, whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Mm-hmm. So before I even get into the second segment, is some of this, it would also depend on how we are defining some of these terms here, and we can get hung up in terminology a little bit with this. But exactly how we're defining exist or beginning to exist, because if you want to get really technical, a star only, quote-unquote, begins to exist because prior to being formed as a star, it was not a star, but all that matter that made the star existed prior to it. So we can get a little hung up in exactly what it means to begin to exist or not. But I think at the bottom line, this statement in this part of the argument is looking at a sort of causal way of interpreting what happens in the universe. That any event that happens has a precipitating event that led up to it. It doesn't just happen out of nowhere. Now, I know of some physicists that would observe that in terms of quantum theory, quantum physics, that there are some ways that some particles behave at the quantum level that don't completely fit this axiom. I am not a physicist, so I am not going to try to comment definitively on this, but I've been aware of some physicists that have called a definitive statement like this into question in terms of quantum particles. So, for the sake of argument, I'll go ahead and accept premise 1. In terms of premise 2, I think we also run into some problems in terms of what we both do and don't know about the universe. The majority of scientists and physicists and cosmologists tend not really to believe that the universe is eternal, but just by pure philosophy alone, we could respond to this by saying, well, the universe is eternal. The universe didn't begin to exist. Most cosmologists that I'm aware of right now still hold to the Big Bang Theory, even though I've read of some that are coming up with other theories to try to explain the nature of the universe without having to invoke dark matter and dark energy, for example. I'm getting kind of dense into physics here, but I love physics. Now, in terms of... with the Big Bang, it depends exactly what we would mean by...
Not the TV show, by the way.
Oh, yes. Love the show anyway, but...
I can't stand it, but okay.
Sometimes you and I remind me of Sheldon and Leonard Hofstadter, like I'm Sheldon and you're Leonard sometimes. Not all the time, but...
They're such cheap jokes. It's not original. Anyway, sorry. Well. Sorry, I'm horrible. I broke you in a very deep chain of thought. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you did.
I'm so sorry.
It's good. Oh yeah, in terms of what exactly does it mean, in terms of the Big Bang, for the universe to have begun to exist? And those are big questions that even physicists don't completely have definitive answers for yet, for several reasons. Number one, we don't yet have a good theory that would unite quantum mechanics with gravity, with relativity, and a lot of those theories break down when you get to the point of the singularity that would have been needed to produce the Big Bang. There's a lot of theories about like what was there at the moment of that singularity, but at the point of getting beyond the singularity, or what may have, and physicists are going to hate me for using this phrase, for what came before it. There's no good theory for that, and there's another reason that they say it's asinine to say that something came before the Big Bang. They compare it to what's north of the North Pole. Because if you're looking at the Big Bang as the beginning of and even maybe the word beginning is inaccurate there, but as the source of space-time, of time itself, of space, of matter, of energy, then quite literally nothing could have existed before it. And then there are other theorists who posit that the universe didn't begin there, that it's on a cycle of cosmic expansion and cosmic contraction, and then it's on an eternal cycle of expanding and contracting, and space-time might change forms or end and then begin again. So, I would say, if the universe did begin to exist, I can accept premise 2. My main problem with it is I don't think we have enough understanding of what exactly happened with the Big Bang to know exactly if that's the best way to describe the universe itself. So it would be hard to even go to premise 3 in this case, because what if the concept of the universe even needing a cause is irrelevant? What if the universe exists without having needed a cause, for example? It's possible. It's plausible to extrapolate that everything that we experience in the universe seems to have a cause, but I don't think we have enough information to conclude that about the universe itself. Now, in terms of the second segment of this argument, where it invokes God to explain the cause of the universe, okay, so for sake of argument here, I will accept the first segment, the first 3 premises I just talked about. Yeah. So I will go ahead and, for sake of argument, accept premise 1, the universe has a cause. Now, when we get to premise 2, if the universe has a cause, then basically God did it, and I'm not saying that to insult it. I'm just, there's this long way of describing what is meant by God, which I appreciate. It's an uncaused, personal creator who is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and enormously powerful. I think, okay, I'll add in another thing I like about the argument. I like the concept of God like this. I do. I don't think it's a bad hypothesis. But my problem with this part of the argument is it's accepting a hypothesis as an axiom that I don't think we have good enough reason to believe in. And let me unpack that a little bit. There's a circular element to this argument where God as a hypothetical being is invoked in order to prove his own existence. So I find a circular element to this argument that I think if this argument is going to be a little more robust, I would think that maybe some of that kink would need to be worked out. My other problem with this is, in some ways, this is basically moving everything back a step. It's similar to what oh God, what was his name? Carl Sagan observed. Let me pull up his quote real quick. In many cultures, the customary answer is that a god or gods created the universe out of nothing. But if we wish to pursue this question courageously, we must of course ask the next question. Where did God come from? If we decide that this is an unanswerable question, why not save a step and conclude that the origin of the universe is an unanswerable question? Or, if we say that God always existed, why not save a step and conclude the universe always existed? That there's no need for a creation, it was always here. These are not easy questions. Cosmology brings us face to face with the deepest mysteries, questions that were once treated only in religion and myth. And I find that statement by his beautiful. It's not perfect in responding to an argument like this, but I think it's helpful to bring it into the dialogue. Because ultimately, similar to what I said in the first part of this argument, that if God is uncaused, then why could the universe itself not also just be uncaused without the need to have God to explain its origin? If everything needs to have a cause, if the universe itself needs to have a cause, then why is God exempt from it just because your definition says that he doesn't need a cause? There are a lot of other things that I could probably talk about with this article, but I think that, or with this argument, but I think those are probably my biggest ways that I would respond to it.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we continue our discussion about the Kalam Cosmological Argument.